So, yeah.
And Varun, just adding to that, I think you mentioned using AI for fraud and detection. See, now another challenge there's going to be for AI. See, whether you create your own platform, whether you engage a third party, processor who provides you AI services, these are the queries you still have to deal with, right? Irrespective of the way you go about it. Now, for consent, the requirement is also that it needs to be specified. What that means is that you can't bundle everything together, or what you can do with an individual's data and take one consent, one accept all at the end of the privacy notice. The law provides that for different purposes, you need to take different separate consent. Now, the challenge will be that for certain AI usage like fraud and detection, that can still, because it's auxiliary to the main purpose, the main service which is being provided. You can take a common consent with the main purpose, but then when AI is being used for you know for pattern recognition, for deriving insights based on a consumer's purchase for the purpose of targeted advertisements, then for that you need to take a separate consent. So merely because somebody is buying a product online doesn't necessarily mean that they impliedly give a right to receive marketing messages or for AI to do profiling and send them targeted advertisements. The organization would separately need to take consent for that. Now, just on the conflict side, I just wanted to highlight three very important conflicts. Now, there are these three core principles of the DPDPA, which form the bedrock of the DPDPA. Lawfulness concerns Varun has already addressed. The other is purpose limitation. So the law says that you can only use data for the purpose for which it was collected in the first place and not for any other purpose. Now, the challenge and conflict with the AI that arises is that AI delivers value by carrying out unexpected inferences, which we did not never even thought of. Now that raises a challenge because that inference that AI can draw was never contemplated at the time when consent was taken from an individual. So though those insights, that pattern recognition may be valuable to the individual, but it is still in violation of the purpose limitation principle of the DPTPA. Second, data minimization. AI says, feed me more and more data because then I can give you better results, a better output, better non-linear productive analysis. On the other hand, the privacy law says only collect data which is necessary for you to provide your service. So though on one hand, AI wants more and more data sets for training, but on the other hand, the law says that you cannot ask individuals to provide more data than what is necessary. The third challenge will be storage limitation. So the DPDPA provides that you cannot store personal data for perpetuity once if an individual withdraws their consent or if the purpose for which you had collected consent in the first place, once that purpose has been served, then you would be required to delete that personal data. Now that raises a lot of challenges. How do you get AI to forget the data it has been trained on? And then, since insights, inferences drawn, or derived data is also personal data, how do you get an AI to unlearn and forget? So these are things which are going to be challenging, which organizations need to discuss and deliberate upon. And as Varun pointed out, it is at what stage do you start having these privacy discussions? You should have it at the stage when you're thinking about the idea. And then it must become a part of each and every stage of deployment of that idea, creating the product or service. Privacy cannot be an afterthought. You can't deploy a system and then start thinking that what patchwork I need to do in order to make it DPDPA compliant. Varun, another thing, this one issue that's been in the news is bias and discrimination, by the AI. Now, one step that the Indian government has taken, which is different from other, global privacy jurisdictions, is Whereas under the GDPR, the organization that collects and uses personal data is known as a data controller. The nomenclature that we've used is a data fiduciary. So there's a fiduciary relationship between organizations and individuals whose personal data is being collected. What that means is there's a duty of trust, there's a duty of care, confidence, and that organizations must only process data, for the benefit of the individual, right? So these considerations must be done by organizations before processing personal data. So I wanted to ask that considering the fiduciary relationship, can these issues of bias, discrimination, opaqueness be addressed under the DPDPA, or would we need a separate, law for that? Also, what are the governance, frameworks that you can establish to ensure that, biasness and discrimination doesn't become an issue?
Yeah. Thank you very much for that. See, this is a very, I would say, under the DPDP, if you to set up a data fiduciary framework, is similar to how at MasterCard we've been looking at trust all through. So the reason why hundreds and thousands of banks and financial institutions globally and hundreds of countries work with MasterCard is that we provide the framework of trust. So you have to realize that this is no different. Trust is the backbone for any transaction or any of the protocols of the framework. Similarly, as a data fiduciary, it is required or it's expected that you're not looking at it as a compliance checkbox. It is the responsibility of the data fiduciary to think about it end to end, and hence think about it from a perspective of the whole 9 yards of the transaction or the whole 9 yards of where the data flows, not just where an entity is taking trusted consent, but beyond that, how is it that the models are learning? From a bias perspective, as an example that you gave, I think the good part to look at it is that you don't, when you're, and again, from a technical perspective, Tridib and Deepika can add more value to it. But when you look at creating a model framework, it is not just about a model learning from a particular user data. It is about how that model is designed and what bias controls that model has. So the fiduciary responsibility is not just about making sure that you're compliant to the law, but you're making sure that the entire framework or the way you've designed the products or the the ecosystem flows through it. I'll give you an example. The way we look at our responsibility is that we've designed our AI solutions to not be decision making. So what I mean by that is one of our risk scoring platforms provides the decision or the risk intelligence, but we are leaving the decision making to the financial institutions. We have designed the governance framework in such a way that the systems are not taking the decisions. So that is one of the first principles as a fiduciary, you build into your responsibility that the way your AI tools are designed, they are assisting in better decision making, but they're not making the decisions for you. So the model is not making the decision. The model is making that decision better for you. So that's one. Secondly, at an enterprise level, as a fiduciary responsibility, and the way we do it, even at a network, is you set up the governance framework having the top leadership involved. So the AI governance framework that MasterCard has, it includes the leadership of all functions. It is not just a simple technology leader or a AI leader is responsible for AI governance. The top leadership is part of the MasterCard AI governance framework, and privacy by design and the governance standards, like I said before, are built in at the time of product, ideation stage, not even at the design stage. So keeping both these principles in mind, as a fiduciary, it makes your responsibility to be a trusted partner across the length and breadth of where the transaction or the data flows, right? And I keep repeating transaction because that's in MasterCard parlance, but purely if, from the audience perspective, where the data flows from end to end, it has to be trusted, and the responsibility to making sure that you have the right, digital tools, but at the same time, frameworks of governance. That is where many of the people, or many of the organizations don't, do it well. And this DPDP, I think, makes the onus on the fiduciary to do just that right.
I think, privacy by design, though it was mandated in one of the previous builds of the DPDPA, but it's not found its place. But from a practical aspect, what we understand that privacy by design should be the mantra. Privacy should not be an afterthought. It should be a discussion which needs to be had with every department at every stage of development of a product or service. Now, there are challenges, there are conflicts between AI and privacy. These are not insurmountable challenges. There are ways in which privacy and AI can coexist. A balance can be struck between innovation and the right of privacy of individuals. And so, Deepika, now understanding this, inherent conflict, how do we address these issues? How should AI models be trained and deployed in a manner that they comply with the DPDPA? Particularly, the data which is used at the training stage, because that will have a significant impact on the obligations under the DPDPA.
Absolutely. So regulations define and state what kind of data can be collected, what can be stored, for how long, and for what purposes we can use that data. And data pertaining to certain geolocations have to exist, have to reside within those jurisdictions. And if we have to move them across, if at all, for any necessary purposes, then there are those data visa requirements, right? So the data strategy precedes the AI strategy. So we need those standardized data platforms and pipelines for sustained or sustainable AI workloads. And that is where the data that is the input to the model has to be representative and unbiased, right? And of late, we have seen the rising demand for on-premise data collection, storage, processing, model training, and also deployment of the solutions on-premise for the data privacy considerations, right? And not all use cases need large models that have been trained on massive data sets, right? So it has been proven that small language models, which are domain specific, which have been trained on small subsets of data, can perform as efficiently, if not more, than the large models, which have seen much more data, right? And because of this, I think we can even do an on-premise deployment and optimize the cost as well. Right? So it serves both purposes of data privacy and the cost optimization. And of course, we will need to build in those guardrails, right? So without the guardrails for toxicity block or for jailbreaking protection or data loss prevention, right? No model can exist in the real world. And on the output side, we'll need that observability. So as human beings, we are not comfortable with black box systems. Right? So we'll need those observability and AI ops, as we call it, so which can report the metrics, the accuracy metrics, the consistency metrics, user feedback, and the quantified user feedback as well. And also the retraining of the models will be required as we see data drifts, as we see model drifts. So I think all these considerations will play a key role in the success of AI systems in the real world. So we need those responsible AI practices at every stage, at the data, at the input, at the model, prompt, and the runtime. Right? So it's about explainability, which is key at every stage. And this can be built into every system that we deploy.
Well, so balance has to be struck. And what we understand is, AI based on processing of personal data is at an unprecedented space, will find novel solutions across industries. So AI is here to stay. But at the same time, right to privacy of individuals will not be sacrificed at the altar of innovation. So therefore, balance is the key, where AI systems are developed, where they build up trust with individuals. And on the other hand, AI frameworks ensure that the privacy rights of individuals is protected. So Varun, how do you balance innovation with data privacy?
This is something that I did at a part of my previous role at Innovation and Customer Solutions. We had a very interesting framework which would talk about to leaders, to internal business leaders, that where do you draw the line between desirability and feasibility, right? We all desire to have the most best innovative solutions, but at the same time, the onus to control risk, which are the non-technical risks, by the way, right, is also on the product managers and the product designers to say that how do you make sure that while it's desirable and very innovative to solve for everything, but you have to make sure that it's within the ambits of the laws, it's within the ambits of the regulations, and thinking about you as an entity may have the right intentions, but as a framework, if let's say an entity which does not have the right intentions, how does the government or the law protect it? One classic example is many of you would have downloaded an app or received a notification, get instant loans, click for getting it. At the back end, before the crackdown that the regulator did, you did not know which NBFC is it. Is it an Indian entity? Is it an, is your financial data, including your PAN, your salary details, your financials are being taken outside India to some other entity? And, at what interest rate are you providing those loans? So it's very important to also have that built into design. So more than the, to balancing that innovation, it's always also important, like I said, and the reason why we have a governance framework at an ideation stage itself to make sure that whether regulatory, whether law, whether compliances are all in place, because for us, the solutions are at a network level. And again, I will repeat that trust and innovation go hand in hand. Innovation can only succeed if there is a trust that is being provided at scale. So it's a very tricky, or it's not a straight answer, but all of you listening, you have to think through that the trust has to be built through along innovation. Innovation cannot be looked singularly. The desirability and the feasibility aspect of it has to come together. And that's how, even at scale across multiple countries for MasterCard, we can proudly say that we've built solutions at scale which are definitely have trust at the bedrock of it. Yeah.
So, the government has also tried in the act to sort of, create a balance between innovation and, the right of privacy of individuals in India. So there are provisions which may help while you're creating your AI solutions, while you are putting your AI tools in place. One is there's an exemption for publicly available data. So if an individual posts their data online, then any use of that personal data is exempted. It is debatable in the future that whether the fiduciary relationship would apply in that context and whether organizations can use the data which is publicly available or not. But as of today, the letter of the law says that any processing of personal data which has been publicly made online by an individual is exempt from the provisions of the law. So AI often rely on scraping publicly available data. So that is a mechanism that they could rely on for training. There's another exemption for data made publicly available if required by any law. Under several laws, the government is required to publicly disclose the personal data of individuals. That's another mode that you can rely on. And thirdly, there's also an exemption for any processing of personal data for research, archiving, and statistical operations. So relying on research, if the activity is purely for research, for training the foundational models, but not for commercial deployment, then at that stage, you can rely on personal data. You can rely on the research exemption, for training, the AI system. So there are these, few provisions in the law as well that you can definitely rely on. It doesn't completely address all the issues, but it helps in, certain stages, particularly, when training the AI models. Well, now, so what has emerged is that there are challenges and conflicts between AI and privacy, but AI and privacy are not adversaries destined for conflict. They'll have to learn to work together. And, as somebody rightly said, that every problem contains within itself the seeds of its own solution. So today my query is AI the solution to the AI privacy problem? How can AI help us in our journey of compliance with the DPDPA?
That's a great question, actually, because it's a very exciting new world, right, for us AI practitioners, right? Because the problems are now very unique, right? And we have to solve for that, right? So which is great. Secondly, I think from just AI helping in getting the compliance, there are multiple layers to this particular problem, right? I can see new AI systems coming up, right, which can actually kind of monitor your entire workflow, right? If there are hundreds of workflow that exist from a particular offering to the end consumer, right? You can do a monitoring of that workflow and say that, okay, at what stages, right, there are certain compliance gaps that exist, right? You can actually monitor like where the personal data is coming in, from service to service, how it is moving, and where gaps might be existing, right? So this is even before some report needs to be created for audit purposes and all, right? One can, at every company can actually, employ these kind of systems, right? That can monitor these compliance gaps. That's number one. Number two is, I think Varun mentioned about consent, right? And how legally it needs to be very clear, right? And another India-specific problem in this particular case is it has to be in regional languages as well, right? 22 different languages, not only in English, right? So how do you translate, right? It's not a very simple translation because the context of the various purpose taxonomy needs to be preserved when you are translating it to a particular regional language, right? It's not just a word-to-word translation, right? And it's a very complicated problem in my view, right? That will require AI to come in and do this kind of a solutioning, right? And last but not the least is like, as I mentioned, at a workflow level, you understand where the compliance gap exists. But if you go deep down and try to get into the security concerns, right? And the deeper data that exists in the organization across the board, it could be customer conversation, it could be certain video, images, whatever it is, right? Structured, unstructured, right? What is the lineage of that data across the organization, right? And there are like plethora of such, it could be gigabytes, terabytes of data in which somewhere there might be certain, personal data that might be hiding over there, right? So how do you search through that, right? How do you identify that there is certain, compliance gap that exists over there, and identify that and, do a scanning and come up with a proper observability of your entire system from DPDP perspective. I think these are new application areas of AI that are coming.
Well, I think as you rightly pointed out, I think the most important exercise that every organization today needs to do is carry out a comprehensive data mapping exercise. Today, our organizations, different departments collect different personal data. The source of personal data is from various sources. And organizations are not even fully aware of what is the personal data we have collected in the past, what is the data we're truly collecting. So in your journey of compliance with the DPDPA, don't assume what you collect, right? Do a deep dive, do a comprehensive deep dive in your systems, in your structured and unstructured systems, and try to understand what is the personal data that we have been collecting, what are the various purposes for which we are using that data. And as today pointed out, that there are AI solutions today which are coming up, which can help you with that data mapping exercise as well. So I think we are out of time. One last word, I think, from my panelists, considering that the clock is ticking and there's just 16 months left with the government debating whether the timeline should be further reduced, what is it that they should immediately start and why they need to immediately start their compliance journey?
I think I can go. I think the government has already started the consultation, and they've been very, I would say, pragmatic about their approach. We've had multiple conversations with them. There've been draft conversations with the trade bodies, with the regulators. So I believe that that's the right approach. It's also important for consumers to look at, their understanding of consent, their understanding of what data sharing means. As an example, if a particular country now mandates you to open all your social media accounts publicly before you visit that country, to your point, which means for X days or X weeks that you're traveling, any entity has a right towards that data. So it's also important for consumers to understand that tomorrow, if they receive an advertisement basis their social media likes or preferences, etc., it is not against the law because they themselves made their data public. So I think it goes both ways. So that would be, the consultative approach that the government has taken is welcome. I think as an industry or as companies who are in this, they should take that onus of walking them through the use cases and the challenges in advance so that the government also understands where this is coming from, right? So you can't expect them to know everything, but the fact that there is a consultative approach, we truly appreciate and welcome that.
I think, as I mentioned, right, organizations need to be a little bit proactive to be compliance ready as well, right, as the compliance is coming, right, in terms of trying to ensure certain responsible AI practices internally, as well as automatically or trying to identify proactively where they can improve in terms of certain places, certain gaps where they can fill those, right, before the compliance audits, etc., and reporting starts coming in, right? So I think these are two major action, I think, from an organization point of view that has to start, along with, of course, the consent understanding and that whether the consents are going in the correct direction, but that also aligns with where the compliance gaps exist in here. It should be the 2-3 things, I think.
And not just as organizations, right, but even as individuals, driving that awareness is critical, and getting that clarity on what are the safeguards that are available, what are the channels for grievance redressal, and being cognizant of the fact that these exist and we do have rights on our personal data, right, and on its usage, of course. And I think that's going to be the driver, which is awareness, creating that awareness, because this is a time where, with the time that we are living in, the reality is that personal data is out there and it is likely to get misused. But that preparedness to face that reality is going to make a big difference.